All right. Well, welcome back to the A Stroll Through the Library podcast. I have got an awesome guest here with us this morning, someone I'm really excited to chat with a little bit because this is actually our first time meeting. We're just saying face to face. I don't know if the internet counts as face to face, but we've talked a ton over the internet and texting in the past couple months. Somebody I really respect her writing a ton and her ministry. This is the one and only Sarah Dangerfield. She's a pastor, an author, all the things. We'll get into it. So thank you for being here with us today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Matt. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. Now, Sarah wrote a book on discipleship, as we're going to get into, and we'll have all of that information linked in here. It's called Leading Spiritual Hoarders. It's an awesome book. I highly recommend it. Our elders team at church is actually going through the book together right now, and we're really enjoying some of the conversation that's coming out of that. But we met originally because I was writing my book on discipleship around the same time, and Instagram, I guess, I that's where it started. I don't know how it hooked us up in that conversation, met through that. And so it's been a great experience getting to know Sarah, and I wanted to have her on here because I'm really interested, as we've talked about on the show before, kind of as I'm listening to someone preach or I'm reading a book, I want to know what are the things that inspired them to write the way that they do, to share the thoughts that they have. And so we're going to jump into a little bit of that, but I want to give you a second if there's anything you wanted to say, to introduce yourself, where are you from, family, all of that stuff. If you want to share anything, I'd love to have that.
Yeah, sure. So my husband and I, we live in Minot, North Dakota. And so we are home to one of the Air Force bases that carries two of the three triads when it comes to nuclear power. And so it's kind of an interesting community to live in. A lot of different people from all over the states that come and live here for a season. And we have three kids. Our daughter is 16, and then our boys are 14 and 12. So as you can imagine, our life is very busy. And we are lead pastors at a church, but prior to that, we were kids pastors for 15 years, working with babies to fifth grade. And it was our absolute joy to do that. And we miss it every day, but we're doing what the Lord asked us to do in leading a church. And so, yeah, that's a little bit about us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, following along Sarah's life on Instagram, they are busy people. I see you guys are out at like baseball games, like all the time, all sorts of stuff going on. So it's pretty great. It's cool to see all that. So the first like book question that I've got for you is one that I always love to ask, which is basically just when was it that you started reading? Like for me, I didn't enjoy reading when I was a kid. It took me a while to get into it. So when was that? And what's kind of the earliest book that you remember reading and enjoying? Anything around that conversation?
Yeah, so I wasn't much of a reader either. And I think part of it was my mom started me in school, I think, earlier than maybe I should have started because I was always really delayed in everything. And I remember at one book fair, I had gotten this teeny tiny little chapter book, where like each chapter is a page and a half.
Yep.
And I was determined to read this book. And I had this big closet in my room, and I would like go sit in my closet with my flashlight, and I would try to read this. And it took me 5 years to read that book because I would start it and then it would be too hard, and then I would put it away. And so I didn't really read a lot. I remember a lot of picture books that I read as a kid, but my first chapter book that I completed and really resonated with me was Anne of Green Gables. And I loved it so much that when I found the 1985 version of the movie, I literally watched it every Sunday afternoon my high school career. I am not even kidding. It resonated so much with me, and like her imagination and her coming into a family. I wasn't adopted, but the family life that I had we were very low income and just didn't feel necessarily wanted by people. But the church accepted us for who we were. And I don't know, I don't think at the time I realized why it resonated with me. But now as an adult, I'm looking at it saying, I felt rejection, but then I found a place where I felt loved. And then because of that, I was able to do and accomplish things that only at the time my imagination would get me there. And so, yeah, that would probably be the first one that I can remember completing.
Sure. No, that's
Yeah.
awesome. I had my friend Kanan on a couple days ago. This will be the next episode, comes out a week after that. What we're talking about now, and we were just talking about the fact that like when you're young, kid, teenager, all of that, like books for me, for him, and it sounds like for you, were kind of like a bit of a respite. It was a nice place to kind of find solace in the pages, and sometimes, yeah, like. I was reading a series of unfortunate events, which is like the newer kids version. I don't know. And I don't have anything that relates to that in any sense. Like I had a pretty good childhood. I definitely wasn't an orphan like the book, but there was still some like solace, some peace that I found in those pages that I think is always important. And it kind of leads me to the second question, just to get a little bit deeper into like personal side of things, but like what was going on in your life at that point in time? You shared a little bit about kind of like being in a lower income area, but like what was going on life wise that you think might have connected those pieces for you as well?
Yeah. So my mom and my dad, if you were to really get down to the nitty gritty, should have never married each other. My mom was born and raised a Christian, and my dad was born and raised a Muslim in the Middle East. And so, as you can imagine, this cute little blonde girl from Minnesota, and then and then a guy from the Middle East, it's not likely to survive, and it didn't. So by the time I was 4, my dad had left. My mom she just didn't have the education to get a high paying job. So she had jobs, but it just wasn't enough to help us get by. And so there was a lot of government help, church help to be able to live, to eat, to have a Christmas present, to have a Thanksgiving meal, all of that. And so that was the majority of my childhood, was just trying to get by.
Yeah, sure. Well, and I think there's an interesting, I have no idea what the statistics are on like growing up in a more challenging circumstance to becoming a pastor. I have no idea whatsoever. But talking with people, I look at stuff and I'm like, man, we all kind of like, I think there's some real growth that happens in realizing. I used to have a sign on my wall when I was a kid that said, when Jesus is all you have, you realize he's all you ever needed. And it sounds kind of like cheesy Christianese phrase, but it's absolutely true. Like, I know for us, we had one Christmas in particular where like our gifts showed up because the church showed up. Like they knew that we didn't have anything that year, and my dad was between jobs, and it was just kind of a difficult place. And I don't know, there's an element of that really did instill community in me, and a desire to continue to help that for the next generation of people coming through. And I think there's a beauty that comes out of that. So I think it's pretty crazy to say that it's certainly not true that everybody grew up that way, but for many of us, I think there is that piece that definitely carries over. Is there a book that you return to over and over and over again? I could think of about 1,000 for me, but one that just has deep meaning for you, keep coming back to?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna give you the churchy answer. For me, honestly, it's the Bible.
Yeah, well, it's probably the best
I've thought
answer.
about it. Yeah, well, I've thought about it. I'm not really a rereader. So I will reread a book if it had been 10 years since I read it and I just can't remember what it was about. And it's usually a fiction.
Yep.
But otherwise, I really don't reread. But obviously, as a pastor, I'm going to read my Bible. But I love rereading certain sections of it that I remember as a kid reading, thinking, oh my word, how did they do that? And like, for example, the story of Joseph in Genesis, I could go back to Joseph every month until I die because I remember it resonating with me as a high schooler. And just because of the situation I was in, how was Joseph able to forgive his family And I'm sitting here struggling to forgive my neighbor or to forgive my dad or to forgive. And I just keep going back to that thinking, if I could just be a little bit more like Joseph and trust that God's got it under control, even if I have no idea what's going on. And so those types of stories, I could just go back to over and over again, not because of my job, but because it feeds me.
No, that's the first off, of course, the Bible is the best answer anyway, but
I didn't have anything else because I don't reread anything.
No, that's perfectly fine. But the truth of the matter is, like, I know working in ministry, like, I had a season that I'm embarrassed to admit, and definitely, but glad it's in the past now. But I had a season where I had a pastor challenge me, another youth pastor in the area at the time. He said, well, are you reading your Bible? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like, I'm preaching 3 times a week. Of course I'm reading my Bible. He's like, no, that's not what I asked. He's like, are you reading it outside of sermon prep? And I was like, oh, well, I mean, I love the Bible, but I don't know that I can't remember at that point. I can't remember the last time I opened it up just to read from me. And that was, again, it's embarrassing to say now, removed from that. But at the time, it was just kind of like, life gets busy, ministry's chaotic. It's easy to get caught up in just producing instead of actually enriching your own life. And so I think that is literally the best answer, because it is the one, but also it's what we all need, especially working in ministry. Like, we need to keep coming back to the Bible and really digging into that ourselves.
Yeah. And I think anybody in ministry can say that they've got a story just like that, because part of our job is to be in it. And so to be able to separate job time in the Word and personal time in the Word, like, we all have to figure out how to do that. So you're not alone.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. He told me the same then, and I appreciate it, but it didn't make me feel any better in the moment. I was like, oh man, this is actually exactly what I would be saying to someone else, and I can't take it myself. It pride in ministry. I've made this statement a couple times, but I think it's true. Like, I was in a room of pastors one time, and somebody asked who struggles with pride, and no one raised their hand. And I was like, guys, we go up on stage every Sunday, or many Sundays, to share a message that we believe God gave us this week. And everyone has to listen to it. If you're telling me you don't struggle with pride, I'm not calling you a liar. I just got a lot of questions. I want to learn a lot from you if you truly don't. Because, like, I know I do, and I've got to fight that constantly. That's not a good thing, but it is true. And I think one of the interesting pieces when it comes to the Bible, really any book, but specifically the Bible, is kind of like, as we grow older, our relationship with it changes just based on context and circumstance. And I didn't know if you had anything that you wanted to share on that, like, as you've read through those stories over the years, how can you think of any ways that your relationship with the text has changed over time? Not that the text has changed, but just the way that you've experienced it in a different way.
I think, so my husband and I were on a sabbatical this winter, and he was studying the Sermon on the Mount at the time. I was choosing to study something different, but he kept sharing everything that he was learning. And then when we came back, he's sharing it with all of our staff, and now he's going to be starting a sermon series. So I'm going to hear everything he learned 3 times, you know. But as he's talking, I'm like, I don't want to hear about the Sermon on the Mount anymore. But as he was sharing during our sabbatical, I remember, like, as he was talking, I was feeling almost like twinges in my heart. Like, I was feeling conviction, and I didn't even know why I was feeling conviction. And all he's doing is relaying what he's learning. And so then I go back and read it going, what is my problem? It's not like I didn't know the Sermon on the Mount. So why is it all of a sudden affecting me? And I wasn't even reading it at the moment when it was affecting me. And the Sermon on the Mount being all about our relationship with people and our relationship with God, and how everything is about the heart. It's not like we like to think it's about our actions, but it's all about the heart. It all comes down back to the heart. And I was seeing just how ugly my heart was. And I'm a pretty like good person. Like not I'm not saying I'm a
Yeah.
good person, but
No,
you know
no,
what
no.
I
I
mean.
know what you mean. Yeah.
I don't struggle with bitterness. I'm not, for the most part, an unforgiving person. I'm not trying to get back at people. That's just not my
Yep.
personality. But every time he'd start talking, I was like, Lord, what are you trying to talk to me about? And I was just starting, it was just like every layer was getting peeled off, and I was starting to see myself for what I really was. And I didn't like what I saw,
Yep.
and I'm still processing through it. Like, what do I need to do so that my heart is pure? And I mean, it'll never be fully pure because I'm a human, but how
Yep.
can I continue to move forward in that? And yeah, I didn't expect that because I wasn't even the one studying it. All I was doing was hearing his notes, and it was wrecking me. So yeah, lots of moments like that, but that's the one that's really hitting me right now.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. And I also have to say, God bless, and you are a pastor too. That is not my point in that, but God bless anybody who's married to a pastor and has to listen to them talk about their sermon 3 months before it comes out, and then again as they're processing, and then again on Sunday morning. I don't know. My wife will sit there. She's like, "Wow, that sermon was good," and I was like, "Thanks. I can't believe you listened to it. You've heard me talk about it for 6 months. I'm so sorry that you have to hear it 18 times." So yeah, for real. Thank you for that. I'm sure Dan appreciates it too. That's for sure. Oh, I love that side of things. And the Sermon on the Mount, I mean, in general, we're again, like I'm not sure how familiar pretty much anybody is with the Mennonite Brethren denomination, but that's what I'm part of. And one of our core foundations, really one of the distinctives of the Mennonite Brethren has always been that we're formed first and foremost by Scripture, obviously, but the Sermon on the Mount's kind of in this heightened way of like when you look back through the history of the original Mennonites, that was what they were aiming for, was how do we do this all the time. And so it's been cool for me growing up non-denominational in Baptist circles, my wife growing up actually Assemblies of God, which I know you guys are too, like having all those pieces and then coming into this, like I hadn't, and it's not a negative on any of those denominations, I just hadn't thought about it all that much until I guess 7 years ago, coming into this denomination, where I was like, oh wow, we're like talking about this all the time. What what have I missed? And then reading it again, I was like, oh my gosh, so much. I've missed so much in the Sermon on the Mount. Like there's so much that we can get into. It really does. It's not action. It's not specifically actions. It's not in a rigid adherence to rules as much as it is, what's your heart posture? Are you really truly loving your neighbor? Are you really truly doing these things? And that's going to look different in different circumstances, but it's absolutely necessary at all times. So I love that. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, for sure. I think when it comes to books, and the Bible probably is one that has definitely flipped my opinion on everything compared to before and after, because that's kind of how it works. But are there any other books, or it could be the Bible again as well, that's fine too, but is there a book that you have read that's just kind of completely flipped your perspective on God, or on some piece of faith in some sense? And what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so the book would be Immediate Obedience by Rod Loy. He is a pastor in Arkansas. Okay. And he wrote this book maybe 2013, 2014, somewhere around there.
Okay,
and cool. I was at home with little kids, and I was trying to figure out, how do I be mom at home, but I'm still in ministry at the church, and I still want to be influential in my community, but I'm stuck at home with all these littles. And I saw this book, and I grabbed it. It was a nice little short one.
Yeah,
and yeah, especially when you have kids under 5 all at home. But I loved this book because Rod talks about how he had this desire of wanting to be obedient anytime the Holy Spirit prompted him to do or say something. And he understood that in order to make this a habit, he had to practice. He had to learn how to hear the voice of the Holy Spirit. He needed to practice stepping into action. So one of the things, it was more of a shocker for me because when we had little kids, we also had, no money. Yep. And he, in his budget, he set aside $400 every month so that every week he could carry $100 bill in his pocket, and he would wait for the Holy Spirit to tell him who to give it to.
Wow.
And he said, It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about me being that person who's sacrificing some of my budget to give. This is me practicing. Every morning I'm saying, okay, God, if there is somebody that you want me to bless, I will do that. And I'm going to listen for your voice all day. And so he was practicing learning how to hear his voice and then to immediately obey. And it wasn't just about that, but that was his way of practicing that, because he knew I could feel it in my pocket every day. And it reminded me that I'm waiting to see who God's going to talk to me about. Yeah. And I just remember thinking, I really want to obey God immediately as well. If that means I need to make a meal for someone and drop it off at their house, or go buy a box of diapers for another young mom, or make that phone call, or make that apology, or invite that person to church or to my house for lunch, or to have a conversation about Jesus, like whatever God is asking me to do, I want to obey in the moment, not process it and think about how I'm going to do it and all of that, but I just want to do it right away. Yeah. And so that book really challenged me, and I'm still living by its principles today.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. Yeah. Well, and in your book, there are, one of the things I loved, by the way, about your book is just how many personal stories there are. It wasn't like reading just somebody's thoughts on something. It was so very deeply personal to you guys. I feel like really genuinely got to know you through your book and learn more about Dan. I have not met Dan. I definitely want to at some point. We'll have to make the drive up there one of these days. Now that I know how to pronounce the town that you live in, my goodness, man, I read it and I was like, I don't know what that's supposed to be. I'm sorry. but no, with that being said, like there's so much in your book that was personal experience and also other people's experiences shared. And I really appreciated that. And I think in those stories, there's just such a better way of connection than like, I don't know, I've shared a little bit before, but like I grew up with a very theologically minded household, which is great. There's nothing inherently wrong about that, but it did for me, and it wasn't anybody else's fault, but it did for me. Like I hit high school, and my goodness, I look back at stuff and I'm like, I was such a Christian jerk in high school because I thought I had all the head knowledge, none of the heart posture, but all of the head knowledge, I thought. And so I thought I knew everything. And then you read personal experience and you're like, oh my goodness, that's where these stories of going and actually doing something with that heart posture really do change people's lives. And I think that is a thing that your book does an incredible job of, is just sharing those stories and inspiring. I know, one of the things, and this is again back to your book, but one of the things that stood out to me was like, we've come into a church that's been around. I lived out in Utah for years and then come out here about a year and a half ago into Kansas. And our church has been around for 60 some years. And there's lots of really good, amazing, beautiful things that come with that. And then there's also the challenges of like, we've been doing the same thing for 50, 60 years, and somebody comes in and it's not just me, but new people in general trying to say like, hey, we should be outsider focused. We should do these things. And the former pastor, thank God, pushed for that a lot. But like one of the pieces of your story, you and Dan, that stood out to me was you guys coming into, I get the sense from the book, a fairly similar circumstance, a church that had been pretty well established, and you guys were trying to push for a slightly different or maybe widened vision of that. So as much as you want to share, like, what was that like for you? I know you share a lot in the book, but is there anything you wanted to share on that? How has that gone? I see your guys' church now looks incredible. But what's that journey been like for you guys?
So our church is a little over 100 years old. As far as in our denomination, we are the oldest one in North Dakota.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
so, as you can imagine, that, like you guys, it comes with really, really great, rich history, but it also comes with a lot of, I think the best way to put it would be because there's generation upon generation upon generation within the church, there is this, what would the word be? The ownership that they've taken of the church is almost too much, where it's become very inward focused.
Yep.
And we're not that way now, but when we came in, we saw bits and pieces of it. Not everyone in the church was like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even some of them who were like that, I think we're trying to break out of it, but we're just really struggling because they struggled with church looking different. You know, this is how they've always known it. And for it to change, and it's always been this way since they were children, that's a hard thing to have to work through. And I understand that. And
Totally, yeah.
Dan and I understood where it was all coming from. And so it wasn't a us versus them type of situation.
No,
it was
definitely
more
not.
of a, we know what is so much better for you, for your family, and for this community if we can shift this boat a little bit so that we're going in a different direction, so that we're more outward focused, still helping those in the church continue to grow, but then challenging them, saying, this isn't just a place for you to feed on scripture. It's a place for you to learn how to share it with someone else. And that's the biggest piece that we've been working on is you can't expect the pastors to be the only ones that are teaching. You should be teaching as well. But for you, it's around a kitchen table or it's around a desk at the office or whatever that might be. And we should all be doing this because we've all been called to be disciples who make disciples. And so, yeah, things have definitely turned around. And I'm so proud of those who struggled with the changes because they continue to say, well, as long as the Bible's being preached, I guess I should be okay with this.
Yep.
And we didn't even make radical changes. I think it was just because it looked different.
Yeah.
So.
No, for sure. I mean, there is always the side of things that like, and we haven't changed a ton. I'm sure for some people it probably does feel more like change, but like you put up when we got here, we had a lighting set up that had been in the ceiling for, I don't know, 40 years probably. And they burned out. Our building got struck by lightning last spring. And I had made the commitment. I said, hey, I want to come in and spend a year just learning because I don't know this culture. I don't know Newton, Kansas as well. I want to just learn for a year before we touch anything. And then a couple months in, the building got struck by lightning and we're faced with, hey, it's going to cost X amount of thousands of dollars to fix our antiquated setup, or actually a little bit cheaper to get brand new lights in the auditorium in the sanctuary. Like, what do we do with that? And all of a sudden I was like, well, I don't think the right thing to do here is fix the ones that there's one guy in the entire country who still fixed that light setup. And I was like, man, what if we fix it and then it breaks again in 2 years? He's probably going to be retired by then. Like, we're not going to even have that guy left. So we got the new lights. It's been good, but it is funny because I grew up in a church with like 15 people most Sundays. Like I learned how to lead worship at that church. That was what I was used to. And it was a great community, not a bad thing at all, but I could totally understand. And I think there's a compassion that's conveyed both through your book as well as through just talking with you that like, yeah, I think it's understandable why those changes can be difficult. Like it doesn't look the same as my church looked yesterday. And I think it's helpful for pastors, for leaders to hear that and be like, oh yeah, I do have to remember. I think also I'd be interested in your thoughts on it, but children's ministry, for you guys having worked in children's ministry, I can only imagine, I don't mean that in a demeaning way to adults. I just mean there's so much change in children's ministry. Things don't stay the same for 30 seconds because kids don't stay the same for 30 seconds. So is there anything in there that you think helped out with moving into the lead pastor side of things that's helped you guys?
I think being children's pastors, it was like the best training for us to take this church in particular. I think what also helped us is there was a season that we lived in Williston, North Dakota, which was the epicenter for the oil boom back in 2010. Yep. And so things were constantly changing. So kids ministry in general is constantly changing because kids are growing and changing at such a fast rate, right? So a 2-year-old compared to a 3-year-old, it's a vast difference. And then even a kindergartner to a second grader is just wildly different. Yeah. But then in Williston, we were growing at an ungodly speed. I mean, it was like, that sounds terrible, but
no, I get it.
The church was growing. The church was growing so fast, and it was just because the community was growing so fast. I mean, it was so fast that the infrastructure of the city was struggling. And so everyone except for the pastor and the secretary lost their office because it had to become a classroom. Yep. With the room with the copy machine became a classroom. Like that's just what happened. And it was every 3 months we were changing things. And so coming into a church that nothing had changed for a very, very long time, and not even like building wise, but just using the exact same curriculums and having the exact same setup and the same times for when things were meeting and all of that. And then for someone to come in and say, well, I think it actually would be better if instead of meeting at 9 o'clock and then having Sunday school at 10 and then having service again at 11, maybe we should have Sunday school first so that 10 o'clock time slot can have the service. And you would think we were, doing other things that were like unbiblical or something. Because people were struggling with it.
It borders on personal heresy at that side. It's not biblical,
right?
but it feels the same to many. Yeah. Yep.
Right. Yeah. And just having to have those conversations of, we love what you've been doing, but we see potential for growth if we just make this one tiny little change. Yep. And so it took time and a lot of patience and a lot of conversations, but it's really good. And the Lord's taken care of it. And in all honesty, COVID helped us a lot with some of the changes. And God's been faithful. So.
No, absolutely. Yeah. We came from so out in St. George during COVID, actually. It was kind of interesting. There had been just being honest, the LDS church, obviously Mormon church is huge in Utah. That's where most people attend. And there was a lot of people who wanted to come check out our church, but just due to the reasonable familial pressure of like, if you don't show up at our church on Sunday morning that you've been going to for 20 years, grandma and grandpa are going to notice. So they wouldn't come check out South Mountain where I worked at. And then COVID hit and the LDS church just kind of shut down for a year, didn't even live stream, nothing. And so people all of a sudden showed up, and it was really cool for us because all these people who wanted to come check it out were finally there. It was an amazing opportunity, but I totally get what you're talking about when it was like ungodly pace of growth, because we had one Sunday when I moved out there was about 350 people in our service on a Sunday morning. It was healthy. It was going well. COVID hit, and we had a week where it went from about 400 to 750 to 1,000 in 2 or 3 weeks. And we were like, oh my gosh, we don't have toilet paper. We don't have we didn't buy coffee for this many people. We've got to clean the building twice as much because twice as many people came through. How do we do this? It is good problems. But when I was working 90-hour weeks trying to get through that, it didn't always feel like good problems. You'd get to Sunday and you were really excited when you see the baptisms and the life change and hear the stories. It really did energize us through that. But yeah, it can be challenging. Growth is a whole different world of different difficulties that are worth it. Just crazy. And then to come from
Definitely
that,
worth it. Yep.
yeah, to come from that where you're forced to adapt into Kansas, where our church has changed a lot before I got here. I owe a lot to our former pastor, but still trying to say, hey, service times, maybe we need 2 services to accommodate the people coming in, is definitely challenging in different ways. And so I appreciated your guys' story, and kind of that was part of the reason we're going through it as an elder team, because we were like, hey, I read it and I thought, this is too similar not for us to go through it. We've got to talk through some of these things, and it's been very helpful for us. Back to the book conversation, I've got like 3 more questions that I think are kind of interesting to dig into. And one in particular is probably my favorite question I get to ask, and I don't know why, but I really enjoy it. But what is a book or author that's given you words to something that you kind of always felt, but you didn't quite know how to say before reading that?
This one was very easy for me to answer.
Okay,
it's
good.
a book by Danny Spitters, and it's called When Everything is Missions. And so if you do read my book, you'll discover that I have a real heart for global missions work.
Absolutely.
And this book, the main theme is we need to use the right language, because otherwise all we're doing is confusing people. And as the church has shifted and changed over the years, we have a lot of people now who are coming to the church who did not grow up in it. And so if we're not using language the same way, it can be very confusing for people. So terms like missions, missionary, those types of terms, we can see them where people attempt to use them interchangeably with other things. So like churches that have that sign as they're leaving the building that says, you are now entering your mission field.
Yep.
I mean, every church in the 90s had that, right?
Yep.
And I remember thinking, even as a kid, that the phrase, and I grew up in the church, the phrase didn't make sense to me. I didn't understand why that was my mission field, because it was Brainerd, Minnesota. Like, that's not on the other side of the world. So I didn't understand the phrase. And so as I got older, I think I started understanding why it didn't make sense to me, but it wasn't until I read this book that all of a sudden it was like, because we're using the wrong terms for things. And so their main thing that they said, and I'm in complete agreement with, and I know not everybody agrees with it, but when we say someone is a missionary, we are saying that they are doing ministry work in a completely different cultural context than what they are used to. So you could be a missionary to Kenya, or for someone like me, I could be a missionary to inner city Chicago, because that is a culture I am not used to. I like to drive for hours and maybe see cows, and that's it. That's what I know. And so when we say to our students that they're missionaries in their own school, I don't agree with that. They are disciples going into their school. They are people who are carrying the gospel message into their school, but they are not missionaries, because that is a cultural context that they already know and are familiar with. And so I just appreciated that book because they handled that conversation with such grace, because, depending on who you talk to, they are like very much in a disagreement with that. And I don't want to have that conversation just for pure argument's sake.
Absolutely,
But I also don't want to confuse our kids. Our church is very much, we say that we are a sending church, because we want to send people on mission. We want to send people overseas and across the street to share the gospel. But we want to make sure that they understand that, yes, there are missionaries, but everyone is called to be a disciple.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So, that book definitely helped me have that conversation in a better way with people.
Totally. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's great. I appreciate it. Yeah, we're currently I just got to meet with one of our reps from our denomination's missions agency, and have a conversation. And one of the things that really, it shouldn't shock me. It makes me sad more than it does anything else, but it's ultimately a good thing. But our denomination planted a ton. We put a ton of missionaries back about 50 years ago and planted a ton of churches in the Congo. That's been kind of the main place. And they now, as of this moment, I believe church-wise, outnumber our U.S. churches, which is really cool, incredible that that's happened. But they certainly, in their own feeling, and having met some of them, I think they're unfortunately kind of right, certainly have outnumbered us in discipleship out there. And so they've started sending missionaries we sent 50 years ago from the U.S. to the Congo. The Congo is now sending Mennonite Brethren missionaries back to the U.S. and they're saying, hey, you guys helped us. You seemed like you had it figured out 50 years ago, and it feels like you don't anymore. We're coming back to share the gospel with you guys again. And it's fun to see, like, just how missions in general, like, works out in so many different ways, because it's undoubtedly missionary work by both definition for someone from the Congo to come back to come to the US and share with us. But it was so interesting because when you walk through Walmart in Newton, Kansas, you see more people wearing Bible verse t-shirts and the Chosen TV show hats and all of that than you see anybody else. So like, it doesn't feel like a mission field to us in the same way. But there's definitely something that we all need, and discipleship is that piece that I think gets missed so very often. So yeah, I totally appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. How did kind of, I guess you kind of answered the question, but like, how has that shaped your way of viewing things? I think you kind of answered like how that works out in your life. But when it comes to those like conversations, if somebody was to come up and say, well, I think ardently that we are missionaries, like in our own right. Like you said, you don't want that conversation for argument's sake, and I would totally agree. But like, how would you handle that? How would you kind of direct the semantics maybe of that into a more helpful fashion? Because I hear that all the time. I think there's elements of that I resonate with myself, but I understand what you're talking about. So kind of interested in what your thoughts would be on that.
Yeah, I would probably start with I guess we can agree to disagree, because I'm not going to sit here and try to argue my way into proving that I'm right. But then I'd say something, even though I always think I'm right, but most humans do.
I think that's how it works. Yep.
But I think the next question I would probably say is, well, no matter what it's termed, who are you discipling? Like, give me a name of somebody that you are meeting with on a regular basis that doesn't know Jesus yet. And how are those conversations going? And if they can't answer that, then I would be like, then why are we arguing about whether someone is a missionary or not? Because you're clearly not doing what Jesus asked you to do. And I'm willing, I am very willing to have that conversation, because I mean, part of the reason why the book came about was because as a pastor, I'm trying to figure out how to lead people who aren't doing what God asked them to do in the Great Commission. And I am tired of our churches being filled with people who say they love Jesus, but they're not doing what Jesus told them to do. And so I will have way more grace for someone who does not claim to be a follower of him. I will have way more grace in a conversation like that with them than I would be with someone who's been a believer for X amount of years. Because if they're not doing what Jesus asked them to do, then who cares about what the term is? Like, go do it. Go do what you're supposed to be doing. So.
Nope. That's exactly what I thought your answer was going to be, and I'm glad it was, because I think it needs to be said, and the truth is, I 100% resonate with, like, when we had trying to think of a way to word this example, but we had someone come into the church who's new, and there were people who were kind of upset that there was loud conversation going on outside of one of the Sunday school classrooms, and they were like, wow, we were trying to have Sunday school. And I was like, here kind of my thought is just, we have a brand new person, new to church, new to faith, and they were talking at a slightly higher volume than someone who's been in church for 50 years wanted to hear during their Sunday school class. Which one of us is called to have biblical maturity more than the other one? Okay, yeah, probably the person who's been here for 50 years. So I'm sorry that bothered you. I also don't really care all that much, because the truth of the matter is this person's here and they're learning for the first time. We should have mountains of grace for that side of things. You're new to it, you're learning, and I wish I've been the new Christian in places and not felt that grace. And I wish that we could have had that offered to me and my family and that sort of thing at that time. And so I think in retrospect, I look at it and I think, yeah, there is, it might sound negative, but there's more expectation if you've been a Christian for a longer time. Like it's all there is to it. It's not that you're a higher level. You didn't climb up the ladder as a better Christian, but you should be growing in your maturity. And I think that's something that is huge. One of our, and this will lead pretty well into that next one, but one of our values at the church that I worked at in Utah was maturity is measured by how well we love God and we love others. Not measured by the amount of gray hair, although mine keeps getting more gray. But it's not measured by, I feel that. Not measured by gray hair. It's not measured by years predominantly. It's how well we love God and we love others. And I really loved that viewpoint of things because it helped shape conversations when somebody would come up and say, well, I don't like that this part of the building moved to this part of the building. I could say, well, it's better for the people who are new and they need a little bit more of a bumper car to get in here than they need that. Like we can do this, and maturity is measured that way. So it really helped us. The question that I think is like the most telling when it comes to, in a good way, when it comes to ministry, that sort of thing. If there's one book that you could put in the hands of every Christian right now, and I guess the Bible is probably the best answer in that one too, but we'll just accept that the Bible is probably the best answer. But is there any other book that if you could put it in the hands of every Christian right now, what would it be?
It would be David Platt's book called Something Needs to Change.
Yeah.
And
it's a great
so
book.
he talks about how he went on, essentially it was a missions trip, but it was more like a vision trip because the workers that were in the country that he went to wanted to show him what they were working with and what they were coming up against. And so literally took him on a hike that was very long, weeks long, I think it was. I can't remember exactly because, again, I don't reread books. But he took David on this hike, and he saw all these physical needs. He saw the need for medical attention. He saw the need for food. He saw the need for clothing. He saw all these needs, and he was strictly told, do not give them anything. Do not give them food from your pack. Do not give them clothes off your back. Nothing. And David was so emotionally, like it just sucked him dry, not being able to meet these physical needs. And it got to this point where he was just like, I don't understand why I couldn't give that child my granola bar. Yeah. And he understood if I give this kid my granola bar, then 50 other kids are going to show up and want something and I don't have something. And he understood that, but he's thinking, even if I was just alone with this child and I can't, why? And the guy said, because their spiritual needs are so much greater, and that is our priority. Because if we give them something and then give them Jesus, when they no longer have those physical needs, are they going to think that Jesus no longer loves them? They need to know how to serve him even in the hardest of conditions, because that's the only thing that will save them.
Yep.
And while we don't see that as much in the States. I know it is in the States, but we don't see it as much. It's not as prevalent. We have to remember that we have all these great ministries. I mean, you've got stuff as large as Convoy of Hope that's helping with disasters, and those things are needed and important.
Yeah.
But then even as a local church, we want to help meet the physical needs of our community. But really, what our community needs more than anything is spiritual. And if we can feed them that and teach them how to serve Jesus even in the midst of struggle, then when they hit the roller coaster of life that we all hit, where we have our highs and our lows, when those lows come, they're never debating on God's love for them. They're never debating God's purpose for them, because they've learned how to serve him already in the lows.
Yeah.
And I think that is huge. And we have, our own church does plenty of things for the community as far as physical needs go. But I see it, like we do a Christmas mall thing every Christmas. So we, instead of giving gifts to parents to give to their children for Christmas, we get a bunch of gifts and let the parents come and pick out a gift for their kid, because they know their kid better than we do. And then when we wrap it, we have them put their name on it and say, you are the one that's giving the gift, because we want to give the dignity back to the parents, especially those that are in financial struggles. But some of them have taken it and have just been so grateful, and some of them just continue to connect this Christmas gift or this Christmas outreach with how much Jesus loves them in the moment. And I wrestle with that, because we want to do this because I was that kid. If it wasn't for the church, I would not have had a Christmas gift. So I get that, but their spiritual need is just so much greater. And how can we serve that first and foremost? And so I think that book, it's missions, and it can be taken into our local church context as well. And I think everybody should read it.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I read it a long time ago, but I think I got to reread that one because it's been a minute. Yeah, it is. I think there's a big thing that you touched on in that conversation of like, once you have given something, specifically with the Christmas gift, like analogy or that as a story side of things, I think it touches on something that the church, in my perspective, capital C church, has struggled with a lot over the last couple of years or couple decades, when it comes to like, we've become in many cases comfortable with people saying like, I experienced God's love more in this moment than other moments. And I think that we miss something. I get it. Don't get me wrong. There are times where we've needed something and someone from church has provided it. And like, yes, I do. I'm very grateful for that. I do think it's the Holy Spirit's leading in those moments. And I think that's beneficial. I don't think that's all bad. But to think that God loved me more in that moment would be absolutely incorrect. He loved me just as much if I didn't get new tires for my car, or I didn't get the thing taken care of. And I think one of the interesting, this is off the cuff, not on the paper or anything else, but just kind of a thought that I had is like, we often, when it comes to worship, is one of the places that I've seen that a lot, where I'll have people, I remember talking with our worship pastor in Utah, and we always had this conversation, but somebody would come in and they would say, man, worship was just it today. The Holy Spirit really showed up this morning. And I was like, I get that. I do. However, as a believer, wouldn't you also tend to agree that the Holy Spirit's always there? Like maybe our walls were torn down a little bit more, internal, the distractions were taken away a little bit more. And that's good. That is what worship leading ought to do. But the Holy Spirit didn't show up more than he was already, because he's already with us all the time in all things. And so I was just interested. I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to that, but any thoughts you had on that? I think it's a big one to me that's kind of off topic, but but important nonetheless.
I think it's spot on. And I think we can even take that with, it's not the same, but it's the same concept of, say someone gets a diagnosis and then they go through treatment and then they find that it's gone, and it's like, oh, praise God, he took care of me. Well, he would have taken care of you even if you still had to fight it. Like and And I get why people are saying it.
Totally.
I get
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. It's not
Because
negative
yes,
per
he
se.
took care of it.
Yep.
But he's going to take care of the sick just as much as he's going to take care of the healthy. And so I think it's the same concept of, we just have this perspective that God takes care of things circumstantially, and that's not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely true. I love when somebody will say, like, because I'm not Assemblies of God. I'm not quite as Pentecostal, but with that being said, I do believe in healing. And I absolutely have seen it. Like, I know that's true. But it's always funny to me when somebody will say, like, God healed in this circumstance because it's so visceral and obvious. I totally agree. But then that same person could go to the doctor, receive care, receive treatment, and then they don't think about it in that same sense too. And that's a different piece, but they'll be like, yeah, well, it just got taken care of because of modern medicine. And I'm like, man, 200 years ago, it is a miracle because 200 years ago, you wouldn't have had that. Like, God worked through that system as he does. And that's pretty incredible too. Both are healing. And to say that that's not anything would be wild, which we don't have to get into that. But I grew up in many circumstances where healing just didn't exist. And I was like, I don't know, guys. I've seen some crazy stuff. I'm pretty sure it's happening. Like, I watched a broken leg not become broken anymore. And I've also seen people go through cancer treatment and come out the other side. And that is healing just the same, God working in both. And if it doesn't work, they're fully healed on the other side of things. And that's still God's provision and his guidance in that, as tough as that could be. So anyway.
Our human perspective doesn't always like it.
No,
we have to understand that God is sovereign, and that's just, that's a whole conversation.
I was going to say, I won't take us too far down that rabbit hole today, but yes, I do think it's an important thing that the church just kind of has made. Our language has not been as clear around, I think, in the last couple decades as it probably could be to help with that. So the last question I've got for you about books, last thing to get into is, are there any books that you are reading right now that you're excited about? Could be something recently, could be something currently in, but anything you're working on at the moment.
Yeah, so I had decided 2025 was going to be the year that I just read for fun. After having read to write my book, I just needed a break. And so I've been hitting up my Amish fiction for all you Amish fiction lovers. And then, I know my husband's just like, oh my word, again. But, and then I am currently reading the comedian Leanne Morgan. I'm reading her book, What in the World?
Oh, cool,
and
cool.
I just love her. I can hear her Southern accent in every word that I read. And I'm just really enjoying it. And I love reading about the life of somebody who loves Jesus, but doesn't serve as a Christian comedian.
Yeah.
She is just a comedian who happens to be a Christian. And I just love reading the ins and outs of how she has learned how to trust God and how she's learned how to maneuver through things as a Christian and not always looking like the world, and the things that she's had to process, but also the funny stuff, like the stories of pageants and all those things. And it just makes me laugh. And I'm enjoying reading that.
I haven't read a comedy book in a minute, in a little while, but Jim Gaffigan wrote one a while ago that was just a wild. It was a fun read. That's all I can say. It was nice. I shared in the last episode, but I totally get it. People will walk in and they'll be like, "You're reading that for fun?" Like, because I'll be reading something theological, and I'm like, "Yeah, I still find a lot of joy and solace in those." But like, Jim Gaffigan was actually just fun to read. I don't know that I took much out of it, other than his analogy. I'll never forget his analogy for having, I think he's got 7 kids or a lot, whatever it is.
A lot.
And they were living in a 2-bedroom apartment in New York City when he wrote the book, with all of their young kids. And he made the analogy. Somebody said, how do you have so many kids? And he said, well, once you have 3, I think it was 2 or 3, he said, then at that point you're already drowning, and it's just like you're drowning in a pool and someone hands you another baby. Like, you're already in it. Like, it's not getting any crazier. Now you're just holding a baby up above the water. And I only have 3 kids, but I feel that when we went from like man to man to having to play zone defense with having 3 kids, I was like, whoa, we're out of our depth. I honestly think if we had 10 kids, we would still be out of our depth. So there's just it'd be more crazy.
Yep.
Sure, not, trust me, but yeah, I don't know. I don't get it. But I love that. Yeah, it's I just find it fun to read for fun too. I don't know. I think it's a good thing. And all of it kind of shapes us in different ways in a good way most of the time. TV has been the thing, and we'll start to wrap up the conversation a little bit with this, but TV's been the thing for me that like I've never really been into movies, TV shows until the last year or so maybe. And I have found the biggest difference between my wife and I, and I'm grateful for it, but the biggest difference has been what we like to watch. 'Cause have you heard of the show The Bear? It's like a Hulu show about a guy in a kitchen. It's maybe not the most church appropriate. There's a lot of language. I will give that warning for anyone listening to the podcast. But I worked in a machine shop before, so I've heard all the words. I wasn't too worried about it. My kids are in bed. But with that being said, it's a fun show, guys working in a kitchen, but it is stressful because it's like Michelin star restaurant, chaos going on, and my wife just cannot get into it. She worked in kitchens before, and she was like, this is stressful. I want to unwind. And so she started watching Sullivan's Crossing on Netflix, and it is like, it's physically painful. She's going to hate that I'm talking about this, but it's physically painful for me to watch that show because I'm like, oh my gosh, it is like a Hallmark times 50,000. But for her,
makes it so good.
I know. No, and I sound so snobby and so negative when I try to talk about it. I'm aware, and I'm sorry, Hannah. I'm trying to do better, but it is one of those things where listening to it or watching it, I'm like, oh my gosh, how could I enjoy this? But then I think it is the beautiful reality of like those two things are at odds, and yet we come together to make one person in some sense together as one. And it's a rounded out whole person. And I'm grateful for that. I really am. I'm trying to get into the show. I haven't gotten there, but I'm trying. But anyway, I think with that being said, I just wanted to reiterate again, Sarah's book is incredible. For anyone listening, please go check it out. If you've got questions about discipleship, if you want to know how to dig deeper into your own faith, I think she makes the point very, very well that discipleship is not really a negotiable part of the Christian life. We should be sharing our faith with others, walking with others. And so if you're interested in that, please go check out her book. I know it's pretty much anywhere you can buy a book online, as far as I know, which is pretty great. It's called Leading Spiritual Hoarders. It is out everywhere. Go check it out. Is there anything that any ways that you have that people can follow up with you?
Yep, I've got my website. It's sarahdangerfield.com, and it's Sara, Sara. And then you can also find me on Instagram, and my handle is Sarah E, as in Elizabeth, Dangerfield, and you can find me there, and Facebook as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll put all that in the show notes as well, so people can find it. You'll be able to see it wherever you're listening or watching this. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And it's been fun just getting to chat and meet almost face to face. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Sarah. And definitely we're praying for your guys' ministry. And one of these days we'll make the drive up there and come see the other part of the Great Plains. I think that would be fun.
There we go.
So yeah. But thank you so much for being on. I appreciate it.
Yep.
And we'll talk again soon.
Sounds good.